Well, as this is recorded, we're going to go ahead. I don't think there's anything that we need to vote on for this TOC, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started while folks sign in, and recognition of everybody who did show up on time. Don't want to take too much time. So thank you all for attending the Ortelius Technology Oversight Committee board meeting. We try to do these twice a year. Next year, things are starting to heat up a bit, so we might want to do these more frequently. But for now, I try to do them every 6 months. Quite a bit has happened since the last board meeting, which is a good thing. Let me just go through, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the what we've done, what we've accomplished, and then I'm going to hand the roadmap over to Steve. Hey, Jeremy, there you are. I'm going to hand the roadmap part of it over to Steve, and just to let everybody know, Steve probably hasn't seen all these screens. So first, I want to thank all of our TOC members for continuing to follow us. It's been very helpful to have some of you on the board over the years, and we appreciate all of you who have made this commitment to us. Everybody from Christopher Palmer, who is one of our end users, I don't see him on today, to Hank, who I bugged at from a LinkedIn connection, to Tara and Phil. And Phil has been super involved in the project from the years back. Tim Kelton and Doug Orr, we still keep in contact with them. We keep updated. We update them on what we're doing on a regular basis. They were the first two people on the TOC. And then, of course, Bill Pertelli, our distinguished coach and board advisor, and then Jeremy Davis from Red Hat, and of course, Steve. So what we have done, we've been busy. We now have about 194 members in our Google Group community. These individuals sometimes become committers, sometimes they become contributors to blogs, or maybe they might speak. We started from zero, and Siddharth Parikh, who is running our ambassadors at the time, bugged me to create a LinkedIn group for Ortelius, and that quickly jumped to 292 members in a very short period of time. We started that LinkedIn group, I think, maybe, Siddharth, when do you think we did that? In August?
Yes, somewhere in end of Q2 and starting of Q3, somewhere around Q3.
Yeah. We now have about 50 active committers, and we're doing about an average number of approved pull requests. We do about 14, and we're having our second Visionary Summit coming up in December. Our Visionary Summit, what we do with this is we have an approach of education in general in this open source community. And one of the areas that I perceive to be a problem for a lot of people who want to further their careers is the ability to get an opportunity to speak at a conference. It's hard to get into these conferences. So what we've done is we've created our own conference. We host it on Twitch. We do not try to get, we don't sell it like a regular conference. We're sort of disrupting that. We don't try to get sponsors. We don't try to drive lead generation or anything like that. We simply have a lot of fun, and we educate, and we give our contributors an opportunity to speak for the first time at a conference. We host it on Twitch. I call it the campiest conference you could ever go to. We laugh a lot, we have fun, and we play some really fun, we do old-fashioned sci-fi movies during the breaks, and we're going to have some games this time. This conference, we are having a keynote. Ankur Kumar, who is going to give us a perspective of microservices from an end user. He is not a contributor. He is an end user and has stepped up to be our keynote to really talk about what an end user has to experience. We participated in Hacktoberfest. This was a weird year for Hacktoberfest. They did not DigitalOcean didn't start pushing that they were going to have a Hacktoberfest until like the second week of October, or maybe even later. We kept trying to reach out and saying, hey, is there a Hacktoberfest happening? And finally, a new website was put out there. We did end up with 27 accepted pull requests, which is, it kind of doubles what we normally do. So that was exciting. We have been in the conference scene this year. We were at GitOpsCon North America talking about Ortelius and some of our vision for what we're going to do in our roadmap. We had several speakers at CDCon, including a couple of people who are not contributors but have found the product and done some kind of analysis of it and presented it. Aditi Argawal, she was one of our May 20th presenters. She did a presentation on domain-driven design. She did a great job. It was her first presentation during our Visionary Summit, and we asked her to submit that to DevOps World since it was virtual, and it made it easy for her to do, and she got accepted. We were super excited. And I was able to do a presentation specifically around how Ortelius tracks microservices. So we're getting some exposure out in the general world. We have opened up, we have started our first proper governing board. In order for us to be go beyond being an incubating project, we have to have a governing board, and we need history around how that governing board operates. We built out new bylaws for the governing board. We had elections. Actually, the elections are still running, but we needed to add a full governing board. So what we did was, in the governing board, Steve Taylor has and we copied this from Jenkins. Steve Taylor has a permanent position on the board, and there'll be 6 additional board members, and we will elect 3 new ones every year. So it's a rotating. Normally it would be a 2-year term, but the first year 3 people will have a 1-year term. So next year we will have an election. So we have some new people coming in every year, but we have some stability. So after this year, the roles will be continued to be 2-year roles. So we'll have 3 of them roll off in 2023 and 3 of them roll off in 2024, etc. Brian Dawson from the Linux Foundation threw in his hat, and as well as Anne-Marie Fred from Red Hat. Siddharth actually recruited her for us. Siddharth has been our ambassador lead over the course of the last 18 months. And then we have added Aisha Khalik and Sasha Wharton and Sergio Canales. So we're excited to see how this new governing board works. And they'll be meeting about 4 times a year, or if they need to make any other kind of voting decisions. Now, these are the people who can vote. The governing board will be open to anybody. They can invite anybody to come, but these will be the voting members. Sime Safter will be our new ambassador chair. We do have an election currently running for the champions chair. There's 4 people running for that role, so we will know that after they close on November 27th, and we'll be announcing who is the new champions chair on December 8th. Okay, and on that note, I'm going to pass it over to Steve to go over the roadmap discussion. We have quite a few things in the pipeline. We have a lot of work that we now understand that we need to do. And just to get us started, we initially, when we first started as Deploy Hub and before we created the open source project, the only thing that really competed against us that we could see in the open source world was Backstage. Now, if you have had any experience with Backstage, you'll understand that Backstage is a microservice registration catalog, but they're not managing versions. We are adding the version and the dependency mapping and the BOM reporting to a catalog. There are other tools that are out there. There's one I haven't even listed on here called Noble 9. So money is starting to be put into this area. We started with just talking about it and having a dream to build out this catalog. And as you can see, we have quite a few now new entries into the marketplace.
Well, just stay there, right there. Go back. So one of the things, the service dependencies, that is on the roadmap. So we will be getting that check mark here soon. So
yeah, I have that as a part for you to talk about.
Yeah. So just to let you know, we're adding a few more things to that checklist. Okay, next one.
So we talked about doing this in the last one. It is pretty much ready to go. We have a dev environment that the team is finally doing final testing and documentation on, but we did add to the component. We added license consumption. We added what license that service uses, as well as its README information. We added Swagger information, and we added integrations to things like PagerDuty and Slack. This speaks to service level objectives. This is probably one of the areas that gets the most attention in the commercial market. And in fact, a lot of the tools that I had on the previous slide are really just focused on ownership in production and providing a catalog so anybody who needs to support a microservice knows who to call from a production support standpoint. We have added those same features into our component list, and we probably have more that we still need to add. The one thing we haven't added is secrets, and that will probably be a discussion in the future.
And on this, one of the things that we do differently than everybody else is this information is versioned with the component version. So what that means is if you have a version of your microservice running in production and you have a new one in QA, you don't want to see, or in development, you want to see how the Swagger information has changed. Maybe they've added another parameter or something like that. We have the data there to be able to do that difference report as part of that process. Also, on the CVEs part, we can see if CVEs are being fixed and resolved, comparing what's coming down the pipeline from development into production. So the CVE box, your goal is to have it empty. And that's some of this service catalog information that we're collecting is going to be really important when we start doing some more investigative work and analysis of that data and how it compares to what's in development compared to what's in production and through the pipeline. So on the roadmap, I had a request from the Deploy Hub side about service-to-service dependency maps, and we've talked about this in the past around component sets. How do we deal with tightly coupled components or microservices that need to go together? And part of that equation is knowing how a service depends upon another service. And one of the things that we'll be bringing in from the Deploy Hub side is this ability to map service-to-service relationships. When we're looking at this mapping, we're looking at it from the perspective of the developers. So we're not looking at telemetry data or Prometheus logs, after the fact. We're looking at it at basically at compile time. When you build your microservice, what is it dependent upon and what is it providing? Basically, the way we've kind of implemented it is basically a couple JSON files. And the idea being is we have a microservice will produce certain endpoints, or in the pub subworld, they'll publish certain topics, and then it may or may not consume additional endpoints or subscribe to certain topics. Once we have this mapping at the component level, we can then start building these relationships up so we can see that A depends upon B, B depends upon C, and C may depend upon X. So those relationships will be able to be discovered through this mapping mechanism. And part of that is going to allow us to really look at a version of an application and be able to look at how all the transactions relate to each other. It's more of an in-depth type of BOM report. So it's going to be really being able to take these low-level relationships at the component level and roll those up into application versions and so on. So it will really give us a nice view into what's happening between at an application level, what it's consuming. Now, one of the things down the road is we can look at applying telemetry data to that and really looking at where the developers think a transaction is going and where it actually is going at that level. And also being able to report errors and things like that and roll up log data and metrics from that side. But for now, we are going to be, one of the things on the roadmap is service-to-service dependency maps. Go back. If you're, one of the ways we're going to visualize this, it's called a hierarchical edge bundle, that we'll be able to do the graphical representation of the service-to-service maps. That JavaScript library comes out of the D3 open source project. So if you want to see what one looks like, just Google hierarchical edge bundle, and you can play with some data there. One of the things I like about that that visualization is it'll deal with circular dependencies. Even though developers aren't supposed to do it, they do it anyways. So you have A depends upon B, B depends upon C, and C depends upon A for some reason. They do it. It's not the best programming perspective, but that's one of the things that the edge bundling will allow us to map out. Okay, go to the next one. So this project's actually in flight, but more on the discovery phase. This is coming out of our Australian architecture working group. So Brad McCoy, Amit, Ben, I think Utkarsh is involved, and a few other people I may be missing on that level, Sasha. But basically what we're looking at is how does Ortelius fit into the GitOps model? And what does that mean as far as, where do we start something? Where do we end something? The tools that we're looking at this level are Kepton, Ortelius, and Argo, and obviously we're going to be using GitHub as part of that process. The cloud native part for our playground is Azure. Doesn't really matter, but that just happens to be where we are setting up our development and test our playground areas up in our Azure cluster. One of the things that we've found on our GitOps integration is GitOps is really complicated. There's a lot of steps that have to happen in order to make it work. And Ortelius's goal is to simplify that process, especially when you're looking at microservices that involve several hundred, an application that's made up of several hundred microservices. They're all moving at different speeds through their pipelines and things like that. So this is kind of the transition flow. That is, when you check something in, what happens in each part of the process. Argo was just chosen as the GitOps operator because we had a couple folks in the working group that were familiar with it. So it just made sense for us to bring that in as the GitOps operator. Of course, we have our developers there with their fish sticks and hot dogs and their beers, because that's the way we envision developers doing their commit into GitHub, triggering off the whole process. I'm not going to walk through every single step that's happening here, but basically the next step as part of the roadmap is to actually start coding the integration. We figured out what needs to be triggering what needs to be updated where. So the last 6 months, we've been doing a lot of investigation work, understanding the different pieces of the puzzle to give us a nice complete story. So another part that we have is we've been slowly moving our monolith over to microservices. So one of the things that the service catalog project did was we, instead of going into our monolith and adding to it and making it larger, we actually split out, I think we're ending up like at 9 microservices to have Ortelius run, and that's actually caused some additional challenges. One of them being is dealing with the GitOps model across multiple repos. So we ended up being a great use case for ourselves around GitOps, and what I foresee is new changes moving forward will be done in the microservices architecture world. We did have way back when we were doing our microservices, we were actually using Flask, Python Flask as our underlying microservices framework. And when we went to roll that out, we realized that it wasn't going to work. So we actually did a pivot over to Fast API for Python. And thanks to Karam and a few other folks, Ukarsh, we've been able to figure out how to make those resilient, run in a Kubernetes cluster really nice, deal with recoveries and scaling very easily. So going forward, Ortelius will still be a hybrid, but we'll be going through this whole process of moving things out of the monolith and into microservices as part of the process. With that being said, one of the things that we'll also be adding is taking our Istio environment and allowing us to expand that into a process where we can actually have some of our microservices in the dev environment and the rest coming from our prod environment as part of that process. So most of our stuff is read-only that we're doing, so we don't have a lot of exposure to corrupting any data. And if we do have to do any like inserts or updates to our database, that can be done in a controlled manner under associating things to certain user IDs and stuff like that. But our process is going to be really nice as part of the migration of the C++ pieces. Now, one of the other things that we have that our deployment engine is in C++, and that is on the consideration of moving over to a Python world. The deployment engine actually has like its own language. It's called DM script, and moving away from that to using native Python is something else that we're also looking at. That's a bigger bite, and we just have to be prioritizing when we focus on that.
Hey, Steve, there's a question out there about the,
Yep.
you know, the schedule and goal for completion of this architecture. Is it going to be, are we doing that, starting that after the GitOps and the service-to-service dependencies? What is the team thinking? I know that some of this stuff has to be decided by the governance board, but in terms of how they're going to run that, what's the thought?
So initially, the thought is we just have to wrap up our service catalog and get that released. We are on that part, we're actually focusing on the very last step, which is the installation piece. We wanted to have, it came out from the community that we should have a single line install of Ortelius into your Kubernetes cluster. Previously, Ortelius could run in Docker as a standalone monolith container. But now that we're in this hybrid mode with additional microservices, one of the requirements is that we're going to have to run in Kubernetes. And to do that, we're going to be using Helm and Artifact Hub as a way to host our Helm charts and do this single line install of Ortelius into Kubernetes. With that being said, when we get into the GitOps piece, most of those changes, we may have 1 or 2 microservices that we need to add for the GitOps piece, but most of that's going to be on creating like a kept-in events listener and an event trigger, dealing with interfacing into GitHub and Git for pull requests, updating values files for the Helm charts. So those things are going to be more than likely outside of the actual monolith. But going forward, we'll always have a monolith to start with. To actually migrate the
So
monolith.
what you're saying is we'll have a hybrid. We've already started down the road of the hybrid, and we'll have this hybrid model for the foreseeable future until we get everything out of the monolith over time.
Yeah. So one of the things is it's just our monolith is huge. I wouldn't say it's enormous, but it's huge. We have 135 tables. If you figure each of them have 2 microservices, we have to write 260 microservices to migrate off of our existing monolith. And it's just not a practical way to address something where when we need to have new functionality, we'll add a new functionality as microservices and be in this hybrid mode. I suspect the hybrid mode will be around for several years. So some of the things that as these new microservices come out, looking at how our database is going to change. One of the things that we did do over the last 6 months is expand our database to be a support managed databases. So a Postgres managed database not only on Google, but also on Azure and AWS. So that's one of the things that we allowed for the configuration. And also we brought in a container, a Docker container that would actually run Postgres locally for developers. So basically you can just start up a container. You don't have to worry about installing Postgres or anything like that. So the developers have a way to have access to the database with some preloaded data to work with. So that's some of the things that we've done in the past. The graph database may come into play when we look at expanding the service-to-service relationships as part of the process. The more, like Tracy calls it, we're data hoarding, and it may make sense to move to a graph database just for speed to navigate the relationships. Also, the graph database may come into play with machine learning that we may need to do. Those things are sometimes tailored to better speed, millions of transactions per second that we may need from the ML side. And then the like I said, going forward, microservices, and with the microservices, we will be implementing Istio to do some service level routing, so you can have a dev service being hit based on your login, and the developers can hit that service, and the other services would come from production. So we'll be doing some more work around Istio that gives us that way to have a single cluster that suits the purpose of development and production.
So this is something that we've talked about for quite a long time. Creating a process whereby you could have because everything is really incremental in a microservices world, a way to be able to say, I'm going to take everything from prod, unless I'm a developer and I need to take these particular pieces from a dev environment. And the sooner we move to like a poly database where it'll be easier to do that, the sooner that will happen. And we're using Ortelius as a test case for this, and what needs to be done to make sure that you can separate data between those clusters and be able to route a single new service to a group of users. So we're using Ortelius as a bit of a test case around that.
And just to point out some other things that we've done, even though this was a slide about just some links, the Ortelius.io, we've actually, that is fully implemented as a Hugo server that runs in our cluster and is being deployed by DeployHub and Ortelius. So we're actually using Ortelius and DeployHub to deploy our stuff to our Azure cluster. All of our docs are, we've combined our contributor guide and our end user guide under another Hugo server. So you can have the website being updated through a PR and our documentation being updated through a PR as well. All of it's automated, notifications over to our Discord channel. We're trying to simplify everything as much as possible.
And there's also a way to get to the dev environment if you want to pound on it. So we have, I forgot to even notice, indicate that we had rebuilt the website this year too. So it's been a busy year. We've gotten a lot done, and it's because of the open source community.
I know on the DeployHub side, we have an SEO person working on that. But one of the funny things is when we look at our SEO around microservices, Ortelius is coming up like in the first three on page one. I think they're Ortelius is number 3 on the list. So it's pretty impressive what the group has been able to do, and we're very excited to keep moving along, keep adding in new information that is needed around the microservices and the new version of applications. I haven't had a chance to talk with our architecture team yet, but there's another one, some more data that we're going to be wanting to add that I foresee. There's something called lib years. How old is your version of a package compared to the current version? Are you running a version of a module that's 3 years old? Because that could affect how something's running in production. You're so far behind. That's overlaid on top of the CVEs and vulnerabilities. And then also there's some new projects starting out of the Open Source Security Foundation having to do with signed and trusted packages. We'll be able to bring that information as well. Then of course, where Tracy talks about her risk score and how that can fit into, once we get all this data, how we can do some ML and AI against our relationships and our data to help people make better decisions.
And on that, before he gives you any other ideas, I think we should open it up for discussion. Is there any questions anybody has on where we've been, schedules for any of the work that we are working on in terms of what we covered in the roadmap?
Yeah, so just some quick schedules. The service catalog, I said we're wrapping up. We're going to get that out very shortly. GitOps, the design process is wrapping up, and then we'll go into the implementation phase. And we have KubeCon coming up, KubeCon in Spain, that will probably try to target at least a POC around at that level for KubeCon Spain. I think that's in May. So that's kind of like the short-term roadmap that we have going on.
I had, am I muted? No. I had one question. I want to go back to the data model.
Yep.
Like, I'm not super.
This one?
No, it's like poly.
Oh, yeah, Polly.
Yeah, so the thing that I worry about that, and I'll admit I don't have a ton of personal familiarity with this, but the first thing that comes to mind is maintaining data integrity in a multifaceted system. So what are your thoughts? Like, are there like known best practices around this that you're following, or are you like breaking new trail with what you're doing here?
Right now, we are sticking with the single monolith database until we understand better around the poly and how our transactions can fit into it. It's going to be really transaction specific driven and not necessarily we're going to take our whole database and blow it into a poly database. That's just not going to be something that's practical. If we were going to take the database and blow it out, we'd probably go right to a graph database. But like I said, we have like 135 tables that we have to deal with. So it's not a small effort.
Okay.
But there are some
yeah.
things like when you look at gathering pieces from like the telemetry side and Prometheus, that it may make sense for those pieces to go into a separate database instead of going right into our monolith. So when we start collecting metric data, that may make sense where we put that as part of it, because if we lose integrity, it's not as, we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot.
And it may be that we create tables or have a poly table that's storing particular bits of information, right? Like a bomb report for a particular, just a bomb report table that we're storing bigger pieces of information that's not part of our existing database today. As we start moving out with these individual microservices where we can potentially create or look to see how we could use a graph database, I think that's really what we're saying here. And that's why I have a comparison between apples and oranges. It's something we're still tossing around and really want to understand as we move forward what we should be thinking about for upgrades in the future and not get ourselves locked into anything. Because I think the graph database is really where we need to get to.
Yeah, I think there's probably the broader meta question that my brain is trying to wrap around now, which is the level of complexity of the system, right? Ideally, you want to be reducing complexity, but in order to get to that reduction, there's probably new complexity you're going to be introducing in the meantime. But I'm just,
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you look at the graph databases, there's about a half dozen of them, and some of them are very language specific. So if you're writing in Java, there's going to be one that's tailored to work with Java really nice. There's other ones that are tailored to go around the Golang, so it's one of those that we're looking at. We haven't decided to move away from the monolithic single database at this time, but we just know that we may need to go there down the road sometime.
What we really need to, as part of our open source community, and I continue to look for it, is we have plenty of university students who are really interested in machine learning and data science, but we don't have a good mentor. So if anybody out there knows a good mentor in this area, we have so much data. We really believe that we could do a lot of predictive reporting, and we can start doing those things that I keep talking about around risk analysis based on the data that we have. And there's probably things I'm not thinking about. So we have a lot of college students out there who are interested in data science and machine learning. It's kind of what where their head is, but I've not identified a good mentor who can kind of take this side of the technology on and give us some clear direction on what's the best direction for building out, some machine learning around the data that we do have. And what do we need to have to do that? Is it graph databases or poly databases, or should we stick with our monolith? And I kind of think it's going to be a graph database.
And one of the things when we look at the data science viewpoint, the interesting part with Ortelius and the information that we're hoarding is we're not in the terabytes of data that you have to comb through and look for patterns. We have a lot of different relationships that we need to weight. So, you know, something that's running in development versus something that's running in production would have a different weight to it. And traversing these relationships and kind of understanding them is going to be where the data science is going to come into play. So it may not be ML cruising through terabytes of data, but it may more be on the AI side, trying to understand how to make better decisions around the data.
Even from a pattern matching perspective, and we literally could go in, as Steve pointed out, we're going to be tracking CVEs. We could be able to, potentially we could use the data and say, you know what, this CVE has been, this has been repaired, and we're seeing it in other microservices, and provide an entire report for your entire enterprise that says, these are the microservices that still have these vulnerabilities that you're haven't addressed yet. So again, how do we best leverage the data that we're starting to hoard? And that will be something that we will have to continue really getting direction from. And again, if anybody knows somebody who's good at data science, who'd like to mentor some college kids, we got a great project.
I think I might know somebody that is good in that space. This is Hank, by the way.
Hi.
He actually works as a data scientist at BP, but he also teaches robotics stuff and some data science classes as well. So he does mentoring.
That would be great. That's exact. We've got a couple of kids from India. We've got a couple of kids from Turkey who are super excited about it. We just don't have a mentor. So if he's interested, I'd love to chat with him.
Okay, I'll connect you guys on LinkedIn. Does that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, will do. Thank
you, Hank.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm glad, Tara, thank you for bringing up the database part, because data is what we're in the business of grabbing and doing something with. So it's really a core to the discussion and bringing additional value to the to this open source project and making it more relevant in terms of this discussion that's happening right now around supply chain. Because if you think what we're really doing is we are doing a very detailed job of tracking microservices supply chain for an organization, and potentially, and we've always talked about this, we want to be able to do it even at an open source microservice level. So if we were hosting this in a way that we could, right now we have it at the deploy hub level, we have a SaaS environment that we keep looking at starting to add open source microservices that people can consume, because we know that they're going to be there. But once we start doing that, we can then report on anybody in the world who's using a particular microservice. I know that sounds lofty, but it's just data. It's very possible for us to do. We could show every microservice that has a vulnerability that needs to be corrected, and provide that kind of reporting. So as we hoard data, we keep looking at how we can leverage that data and really exploit it in a way that is super useful across the organization, and across organizations that are using open source components.
And part of the vision I have is, if an open source project like a Node.js project ends up doing a security fix, that all these companies that are have Docker images that are consuming that, the old version of that Node.js module, that they need to just maybe just as simple as rebuilding the base image and running through some test cases. That type of notification and reporting we see is something that Ortelius can help manage and let people be on top of what they have running in production, and know that there are fixes out there. And a lot of times developers don't know that things have been fixed already.
Any other questions about the roadmap, or what we've been up to, or?
Yeah, kind of. This is Hank. I'm gonna take a different approach. I'm gonna take a bottoms-up approach, kind of my bailiwick is infrastructure, right? So one of the things we've been looking at and you look at a lot of people that are not strictly cloud-based, that have brick and mortar, that have on-prem assets, that have data, right? Or you have edge devices, if you can call it, and or data center devices. We're looking at that hybrid model. One of the things that we're looking at is how do we simplify that? And there's a few platforms out there that we've done some analysis on, but it speaks to mapping and microservices, dependency mapping, and how we track all those things. So one is the Platform 9, another one's Spectro, and Tanzu came up with a system called TAP, which is Tanzu Application Platform, I think it's called. Anyway, but they're platforms that tie directly into Kubernetes environments. More Spectro and Platform and Tanzu and TAP do. Platform 9 takes a GitOps approach to deploying infrastructure as a whole and couples that together with the application stack into the infrastructure stack, deploying it to a containerized environment, whether that's a bare metal, an AKS cluster, EKS cluster, whatever it looks like. So I'd be curious to see where this goes with the lens that there's always going to be some sort of hybrid model on how you manage those edge data center to cloud computing workloads consistently across dependencies and stuff. So anyway, just putting that out there is something that I've kind of teased in my brain as I've been going through that and listening to you guys talk through your roadmap.
Yeah. So one of the things in the Ortelius world is a component can be can pretty much represent anything. It could be, a 2 gigabyte WebSphere ear file, or it could be a Docker image, or it could be a test case. It also can be a Terraform to stand up the cluster. So for us, infrastructure is just seen as another component that we need to bring into the picture of what is needed for this application, this version of the application to run. We know we need this infrastructure in place. We know we need this app layer. We know we need this database. We know that we need this these test cases, these those pieces. And we kind of Ortelius is designed to be at the 50,000 foot view, looking over all your whole data center, not only physical that may be on-prem, cloud, Kubernetes, or plain old servers running Tomcat or WebSphere. That's where we're looking across all that from development out to production throughout the whole pipeline. So that's one of the goals that we're trying to bring into play, is that viewpoint, like you said, that lens of where we're viewing the data from. Now, because of the relationships that Ortelius has, you can look at it from the developer's point of view. My blast radius, I'm breaking this component. Who else am I going to affect? To the SRE view, I have this new version of the application, what's in it. And then from operations point of view, is I have to manage these environments and what's in them. So that's kind of like where these dependency relationships lead us to. So bringing in infrastructure as part of that is just an easy extension to Ortelius.
So for example, on the Deploy Hub side, one of our larger customers is a bank out of South America, and it's Banorte Bank. And they first saw the use of this from just a component catalog, not particularly microservices, just components, because they had components on these in targets that are ATM machines, and they had mainframe components, and they had Linux components, and then they had Windows components. And they were really struggling with managing the different versions of all the components running in all the places. So they started using Deploy Hub initially to manage two kinds of components, mainframe components and Windows components, and then they expanded it out from there. So they don't see this as necessarily a microservice solution. They see it as a component catalog. Now, the way we position Ortelius, we have to pick a poison, so to speak, and we felt that microservices was the best thing to position it around. But it's truly it's just parts or parts. It's simply managing parts and their relationship. So it doesn't matter what the parts really are, if you really boil it down to what it can do. but that's so broad, it'd be hard for people to understand until you have asked those questions like Hank just asked.
No, that's awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Anything
Any
else? I
other-
think, yeah, I think we're close to our hour and we don't like to take anybody's time beyond the time that we've asked for. So,
And just one last thing, I just want to, just shout out to, all of our members that are part of the Ortelius project. They've put a lot of hard work in, extra time at weird hours, and we really appreciate everybody that's been contributing and making the project move forward. We have, like you saw on the roadmap, we have some fun stuff coming up, but that's not the only thing. So if you have new ideas, please bring it to the working group meetings.
and December 8th, if you have time, check out our Twitch channel and watch some of our newbies do presentations. And I'm looking forward to hearing from Ankar, who is our keynote as an end user who has helped implement microservices for some large organizations.
Can you send out a reminder for those, Tracy?
I sure will. I will do that probably after Thanksgiving, like Monday or Tuesday.
We have only 2 weeks left for the event.
Yes, we have 2 weeks before so I will do it right after. I'll do it Monday or Tuesday. Oh yeah, I'll do it soon.
Yeah,
I'll do it next week. I'll do it like the 29th or 30th. I'll do it a week in advance.
yeah.
I send out emails all the time, so I'm always hesitant. I try to get a bunch of things to be said at the same time, and then I blast it out to the Google groups.
Well, thank you everybody for coming today, and please come to the Visionary Summit, and then we'll schedule another TOC in first quarter or springtime. Let's put it that way.
Yep. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a good
Good.
Thanksgiving.
You too.
Yeah.